Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for February's Health Equity Speaker Series event. We're so glad to have you with us. We'll give everyone a few minutes to join, and in the meantime, please feel free to drop in the chat where you are today, anything you're excited about, and we will give everyone a few minutes to join, and in the meantime, please feel free to drop in the chat where you are today, anything you're excited about. We try to make every GlobeMed event as accessible as possible. And to do this, we'll read any visual content aloud. We do our best to uplift and read out thoughts that come through the chat. And we'll give you a warning if we start music, so you can turn down your volume if you choose. We also have a live transcript available in English, which you can access through the toolbar at the bottom. Feel free to participate as you feel comfortable with your video on or off, and using the chat and reactions as you please. If you need any technical support, please direct message India Benson, who is acting as our tech DJ today. You can find her name in the participants list, and it says tech next to it. So we'll give everybody a few more minutes to join us. Okay, thank you everybody for joining us. This is our latest installment of our Health Equity Speaker Series. And as an organization, GlobeMed aims to mobilize a community of students and grassroots leaders to improve the health of people around the world. GlobeMed students learn about health equity leadership directly from the experts, our grassroots partners in Asia, Africa, and the Americas, and become a part of the movement for global health equity. We also believe in the power of community behind this movement, which is why we make these programs available to everybody. Additionally, these programs are possible because of the generous support of the community. We'll drop a donation link in the chat for you to also invest in this programming. So today, my name is Christine Badenas. I'm the Communications and Development Manager at GlobeMed. And today we are going to be walking through how to build a tent safe heater that can be used by anybody in a tent or in a situation where they need to keep warm. I am not an expert at this. This is something that I found on the internet, and a number of our community members and students were interested in learning about people who are experiencing homelessness and learning more about houseless populations. And I thought it would be something worthwhile to go through and do a bit of a skill share on how to create something that you can materially use to support those neighbors and community members. And so particularly with the way that climate change is making many more places colder than have previously experienced. Yeah, so there's a whole guide, which I will drop the link in the chat for everybody. You can find that, you can bookmark it, you can download it. This is what I followed to make this, so or you can follow along as I walk through each of the steps. But yeah, I just this is something that anybody can do. So basically what you need is some supplies. So it starts off with having mason jars. These are important because it's tempered glass, and so it's heat resistant. You don't just want to use any kind of glass because it may shatter with the heat. So these are designed for canning and get really hot. So these are the kind of jars that you want to use. You also need some copper tubing to make the coil. You'll need some epoxy. You'll need some like an old t-shirt or something to make the wick. You'll need fuel, which is isopropyl alcohol, either 70%, 90%. Denatured alcohol also works. You need some salt. You'll need a 1-inch sort of mold, which I have this 1-inch pipe to be able to bend the copper pipe around. You'll need a drill, some sandpaper, pliers are useful. You also need this hardware mesh, hardware cloth, plates, some caulking, silicone caulking, and terracotta flower pot. But I'll get to how all of those are used. That's just a quick rundown. Again, there's the list is linked. A list of all materials is in that linked document. So you start out with the copper tubing. It comes in a big coil like this. I got this at Home Depot. You can find it in the plumbing section, and you cut it to length. You can use a saw. There's pipe cutters available. You cut it to about 10 to 12 inches. So this is, I've pre-cut this down to 12 inches. And then what you do is to be able to bend it into the coil shape, it needs to have something inside of it to prevent the pipe from kinking or flattening out. So what I'm going to do is I put a little bit of tape on the end there, and this is where the salt comes into play. So I've made a little foil or a little funnel out of a piece of paper here. And we're just going to fill up this length of pipe with the salt. It doesn't need a whole lot of salt to fill it up, but it does get a little bit messy. There's other things you can use as a funnel. You can use like a cap from a like ketchup bottle or a glue bottle. You just, the pipe itself is about a quarter inch pipe. So it is a little bit small. It is kind of hard to get, to be able to get the salt in there, but you just need something in there to prevent the pipe from kinking up. You could also use sand. You could use a bit thicker kind of salt. I'm just using regular table salt right now. People have tried using water and freezing it. Well, that doesn't really work so well. Salt has really been the sort of best solution. It's also just easily available. So just filling up the pipe there. And so that's just full of salt right now. And I'm going to tape off the other end so that it doesn't fall out in the meantime. And copper is really, really soft. It's really easy to be bent. You can see that it's like, it came in that coil, I bent it out, but it's still kind of wavy, but that's okay. And then you just carefully, I've got the pipe as the mold. You want it needs to be at least an inch around, just because it's, anything smaller is a bit too hard to get the proper coil around. So I'm just using my hands. You can see slowly making this into the coil shape. And you want it to be a full circle around with the ends pointing in the same direction. So the ends are going to end up being parallel to each other. And it's helpful to have the pipe maybe in a vise or in something a bit sturdier. It's harder to do it in your hand, but it's possible, as you can see. And then you've got the pipe, a little bit of the tape fell off. So that's why I've got my finger there to keep the salt in. But then once it's bent in the right shape, then you can shake out the salt. You can reuse it for more pipe molding. Don't reuse it for eating because there might be copper shards in there, and that's not, you don't want anybody eating that. So you can use it to keep molding off some more pipe, but don't reuse it for cooking. And so then you'll take a little bit of sandpaper, and the ends of the pipe from cutting it might be, there was probably some burrs, or probably it might be kind of sharp. So you just use the sandpaper to smooth out the ends a little bit. This makes it easier for inserting the wick, inserting the t-shirt strips later on. It's also just a little bit safer. And you'll also want to make sure that you kind of rough up the ends of the pipe as well. That'll help with the epoxy that's coming in the next step. So, once this is smoothed out and roughed up a little bit, what you're going to do is you're going to have the lid of that jar, and you're going to use a Sharpie or something to mark where you're going to drill the holes in the lid of the jar. So I've got the Sharpie. I'm just going to mark where these go, where the holes are going to go. I'm not going to drill on here because it's loud and I don't have the right setup, because I don't want to drill into this table, but you just make the marks there, and you can see where I will drill for that one later. I do have a pre-drilled one with a different, that lines up with this coil. And so I've also sanded down the holes. I don't know how well you can see there. I've sanded down the holes in the lid. I've also roughed up around the edges again for applying the epoxy. So once you have the holes drilled, you use a 1/4 inch drill bit to fit the 1/4 inch pipe into the holes, and then you just line it up and push it through. And you want it to come so that the bottom of the coil is about a 1/2 inch or so from the top of the lid. And here, if you want, you can cut these, the little tail ends down a little bit more or make them even if they're uneven. You don't have to. It's you know, it maybe looks a little bit nicer, but it's not necessary. And so then from there, we would use the epoxy. It's a two compound epoxy, this JB Weld. And then you would just apply, you put out, you know, you have I've got a plate here where I've been mixing the epoxy. You put a little bit, about the same amount of each kind of each of the tubes, and you'll mix it together, which will activate the epoxy compound. And just mix that together. And you can use like a chopstick for this, something disposable, and like small and pointy to help with the application onto the coil lid. So I've got it mixed up, got a little bit of the epoxy there, and I'm just going to apply it around where the pipe is going into the lid there. And so that will keep it in place, and it'll help, it'll keep the vapors and fumes of the alcohol going into where it will need to go for it to be able to burn and have a lit flame. And then the epoxy takes about 24 hours to cure. So again, I've got one that I've pre-made already. I'll switch to that once I finish putting this epoxy onto this one and letting it dry. And so you can see this one I did yesterday. You can see the epoxy is cured, it's hardened. And once that has cured and hardened, then you're going to take your drill again, and you'll have a smaller drill bit, probably about 1/16 of an inch. You can start small and go bigger. You don't want to, this will depend on what kind of fuel you're using, whether you're using isopropyl alcohol or denatured alcohol. The sizes really depend on the alcohol content of the fuel. The higher the alcohol content, the smaller the hole that you'll want to use. But you can see there, I've already drilled the hole into this coil. And then from there, what you do is you will take the wick and you'll insert the wick into both ends of the pipe and coil. And because what this will do is how it works is with the fuel is the alcohol fumes are what burns, and alcohol burns really cleanly. There's very, very, very minimal carbon monoxide that is released from burning alcohol. Mostly of the byproduct of burning alcohol is carbon dioxide and water. And so that's part of what makes these safe to be able to burn intense, as opposed to kerosene or propane. All of those give off carbon monoxide, and so that's what makes them really dangerous to burn inside, because carbon monoxide is a colorless and odorless gas that is poisonous to humans. And so, if you have carbon monoxide poisoning, is really similar to the flu, but can also lead you to pass out and prevents you from intaking oxygen. And so it's really dangerous. But as I said, alcohol really removes a lot of the danger around getting carbon monoxide poisoning. What happens is the wick will be saturated with the alcohol, and it will pull up the fumes into the coil, and the fumes are released through that small hole that was drilled and are able to stay
to be lit and use that to create heat and warmth using this build. So the other thing, so one thing about when this is lit is the coil will obviously become very hot, but the copper cools down very quickly. It can be cool to the touch within 2 minutes, maybe more, depending on the temperature around outside. The lid will get warm, but the glass jar itself, as long as there is liquid in the jar itself does not get hot. The liquid acts as an insulator. As the fuel is used and goes down, the glass jar may get warm, but it doesn't get too hot to be able to touch. And so that's also part of how this is built. So I've got the wicks have been inserted into the coil. This is probably a bit long. I'll probably trim it, but you want to make sure that the wicks are long enough to be able to reach the center of the jar. And you just fill the jar with your fuel. And I've got one filled with the wicks already in there. And then to light it, you would take a lighter. I have this long stem lighter, and you need to heat up the copper a little bit. Like I'm having a bit of, I need to do some troubleshooting. I think my hole is a bit too small for the alcohol content of the fuel that I have. But what you would do is you hold the flame to near the hole in the copper. This will heat up the copper. It'll cause the vapor, the alcohol fumes to expand out of the hole and into the flame to then create heat. So that's the basics of making the burner, making the coil itself. This is where it's really the fuel. Isopropyl alcohol is available at drugstores. Sometimes gas stations will even have it near like medical supplies and near the first aid stations, and it's very cheap, and so it's easy to access, and it's low cost. And about this much of fuel, this like half pint jar, should last for about 5 or 6 hours of burn time. So it can get through an evening. You can also do some alternating of blowing out the flame and letting the radiant heat go off and relighting. The other thing that makes these tents safe is if the flame is lit and it gets knocked over, the flame will go out because there's the liquid fuel will go into the coil and will snuff out all of the vapor and fumes that are in the coil. So it'll immediately cause the flame to go out. And so that's also part of what makes this design particularly safer to use in tents, is that if it gets knocked over, the fuel itself will douse out the flame, will put out the flame, which is also one of the dangers that comes from using other kinds of heaters inside tents, is that like a space heater or something like that can get warm enough to ignite the things around it. There's been testing done of people putting pieces of paper or other flammable materials near the copper after a flame has gone out, and it's never been able to retain the heat in the copper pipe long enough to be able to ignite something else. So once the flame goes out, the copper cools, as I said, very quickly, and so won't stay hot enough to be able to set anything else on fire. So that's the heating element of the heater itself. The other part of it is going to be the base and a base, a cage, and a radiant heater. So the base should be something heavy and flat. Not all tents are like, sometimes tents are put on some bumpy ground. It's not always safe, so you want something kind of heavy and flat. I've got these plates. You can get plates from thrift stores. And so this isn't fully cured, so you can't take off the heater, the jar from this one. Once it's fully cured, you would be able to remove it. But what I did was I took that silicone caulk and made a base for where the jar can fit into, because you don't want it to be able to slide around. And then there's also these rays coming off, because that will help to stabilize the metal cage that will go around it. And so that comes from the metal cage. This helps to prevent anything from getting too close to the flames, but it also allows for there to be enough oxygen to sustain the fire. So this is what is called hardware cloth. This is a half inch grid. The half inch was chosen because if you supply these long lighters, it can fit through the mesh to be able to relight a flame easily without needing to take off the whole apparatus. So this is cut to be 8 inches tall. So there's 16 squares tall, and then 17 inches long, or 34 squares long. And then there's 3 of the sides are kept flat, or like cut off most of the wires. And then this last side, you can see I left there to be these tails, because what you do is you bend them using the pliers. You can bend them into hooks, and then you'll use that to hook it into the cylinder shape. And this size may change or vary depending on the size of the plate that you have and the size of the flower pot that goes on top. So, but you would use that to hook that together. And once it's hooked together, then you want to kind of hook them, make them a bit safer, and just kind of pinch them down. So then it's stuck as the cylinder. It can't really slide around. You can see that I've pinched them down into being hooked. So that will go. So we've got the plate with the silicone arms, and then that cage just goes around the heater. And then because of the silicone arms, it doesn't really slide around. Previously, people tried to use the silicone caulk to make a circle to fit the cage, but it's a little bit tedious. It doesn't always work out. It doesn't always get to be the right size. It's difficult. So it's just, people have discovered that using the radial technique is just easier, faster for creating it, and works a lot better for preventing the cage from sliding around. And then the last bit of it is the flower pot just goes and sits right on top of the cage. This terracotta is like ovenware. It can get really, really hot, and it also works to radiate heat. And because it's clay, it will absorb moisture as well. So the heat, as the heater is lit, it will warm up the flower pot, which then provides radiant heat to the space around it. And this will get very, very hot. And so it's often, you can take that Sharpie and you can write on the pot, careful hot, to make sure people know where the hot parts are. You can also have there's terracotta dishes that are often used underneath these flower pots. You can put that on top, and you can use it, that it will work as a hot plate for cooking as well. But this is how it looks and how it works. And yeah, that is how to make one of these. You can maybe you can do that to you can make friends with some of your neighbors who are houseless, and ask them if this would be something that they would appreciate having. You can work with other mutual aid groups to distribute them. There's a local warming center that I know of where that is open during the day for houseless folks to go to get warm, but it's not open in the evening. So I'll probably work with them to distribute these to people who need them for when the warming center is not open. But yeah, there's lots of uses for this. Also useful if you're inside, if you're in a place where maybe your power has gone out. I know we saw that with the ice storm that hit Texas last year. If the power goes out, this is also something that you can use in those situations. And that's, keeps you warm and for cheap and pretty easy. As I said, the epoxy takes about 24 hours to cure. This silicone caulk, because it's quite thick, is taking a few days to cure. But all told, all of the canning jars come in packs of 12. The tubing that I got was about 20 feet long. So I'll be making at least a dozen. Otherwise, I hope that if you're going to buy a dozen canning jars, that you would maybe do some canning. But you can also get, a lot of these things you can find at the hardware store if you're going to buy them new. I made 2 stops. I went to Target for the jars and I went to Home Depot for the rest of the materials, and borrowed the tools from people that I knew. There's also tool libraries in many communities, or even Home Depot will rent tools as well if you don't have access to tools. There's lots of ways to get what you need to be able to make these. And maybe there's a local hardware store that you can work with to get wholesale pricing if this is something that you want to make a lot of. But there's you can go, and you can also source jars from thrift stores. You can get the plates from thrift stores. Really easy. There's lots of tips in that how-to document that I linked. And that is, does anybody have any questions or thoughts? I don't know that I have much more to share or talk about.
Thank you so much, Christine. This is super interesting to learn, just how we can make something that's helpful and practical to do at home. There was a question that came up at the beginning. What is the salt that you use?
Yeah, I just use regular table salt. Just what I had lying around. Get some regular salts, larger, right? Like sea salt would work, sand works. You just need something inside of the tube to prevent it from kinking or squishing, because you want to make sure that the vapors are able to go in there. And that as I was trying to troubleshoot why mine won't light right now, the most common issue is a flow problem inside. So you just want to make sure that you do a really good job of getting the salt out once it's bent. So you can do that, use like blowing air through it. You can run some water through it. You can soak it and let the salt dissolve. You can also just do a really good job of shaking it out, but you do want to make sure that the salt is out of the pipe to be able, so that it won't prevent the fuel from getting to where it needs to go. I'm seeing India says, wow. I see Priya says, no questions, but this is incredible. Jonathan says, really cool. Peter says, thanks for explaining. So that is, again, I'm not an expert. This is something that I just learned. Like I said, I'm having a little bit of trouble getting mine to light at the moment. I'm thinking that I just need to make the hole make the little hole a little bit bigger, because I'm using a 70% alcohol. And so that is like the lower end. The other thing, and then as far as fuel, like I said, isopropyl alcohol, you can also use hand sanitizers, a lot of those bulk hand sanitizers that were made, those can be used as a fuel because those are frequently at a like 90 to 95% alcohol. You don't want to use hand sanitizer that has any additives like aloe or fragrances to it, because that can cause some breathing issues or have unintended effects in that way. But the like sort of mass hand sanitizers that were manufactured throughout the pandemic, those can be used as a fuel. Everclear denatured alcohol or grain alcohol also works. But yeah, that's one of the, you just want to make sure that you're using an alcohol based fuel, because again, of the carbon monoxide risks are really low, and the way that it burns and with the way that the heater is designed, so that if it does tip over, the flame will go out. So that says, India says, are there any big no-nos we should be aware of when making these? Just make sure that you are using proper safety equipment. When you're drilling into metal, there can be some shards that come off. So you want to make sure that you have safety goggles, safety glasses as appropriate. Just be really careful. Like I used a hacksaw to cut the copper pipe, because again, it's really soft. It doesn't take a whole lot of effort to cut it. So just, watching your fingers, making sure that you're not being reckless with your own body around tools. But yeah, like safety glasses. And yeah, you want to make sure you like test it before, like, you can give them a test. You can test them outside if that makes you feel better about make sure that there's nothing above like too close above the flame. And when letting the epoxy and the caulk, when it's curing, after you like mix it up and set it out, you want to make sure it's in a ventilated place. The caulk itself smells pretty strongly, so I've had that outside or in my garage, so that it's not stinking up my house. And same with the epoxy. It's just a tiny amount, so it's probably not super dangerous, but just to be on the safe side, you want to make sure you have some good ventilation when using those materials. The epoxy sets quite quickly. I was using it not too long ago, and it's already like whatever's left on this plate, I can no longer use. It's already quite started to set, but it just hasn't fully cured in the 24 hours. And you just want to make sure that whatever materials you're using are heat safe. So like, recommended that it's on the heavier side and not plastic, because it can get quite hot. So some kind of stoneware or something that is heat safe. And that's the thing about the silicone and that kind of epoxy. That epoxy is rated up to, I think, 500 degrees. And particularly because it does get quite close to the flame and is touching the copper pipe, which itself does get quite hot. You just want to make sure that what you're using can withstand the temperatures that this stuff can get to. But safety first, and just keep an idea, like, make sure that things are rated for the heat temperatures that it can get to. And there's lots of information, much more detailed steps with pictures in the document that I linked. There's in the event description for this event today, I shared a link to a Vice article that explained this as well. And if you want to talk to, if you're having trouble and want to talk to somebody about it, there is a Twitter account, Heater Block, HEATERBLOC, which is where I found out about this from. And they might be able to help answer some questions, or people who follow that account may be also able to help answer questions. I did see recently that a follower of that Twitter account made a 3D printed base for the heater itself. And so if you have access to a 3D print, and they made the file available to the public. And so if you have access to a 3D printer, you could print that out instead of making the plate and using the caulk. That might be another option as well. But there's lots of people who are assembling these out and about and around the country and around the world. And I'm sure that if you are having issues or want, need some help figuring something out, I would say reach out to the people on that Twitter community, and I'm sure people would be happy to figure it out. But there's definitely lots of people that need to stay warm as rates of homelessness are increasing, and as climate change is changing the weather around us. And so it's unfortunate that is the position we're in, and hopefully these can keep more people safe and warm. And if you decide to make them, send me a picture, send me an email. I'd love to see it. My email is christine@globemed.org. But yeah, I'd love to hear from you if you choose to make some. And so I hope you enjoyed the presentation today. And the Health Equity Speaker Series is a monthly event, and you can find all of our upcoming programming on our community programming page on our website, which will link in the chat. And again, if you would like to invest in our ability to continue offering programming like this, we'll drop our donation link in the chat as well. So I hope to see you all at our next program next month. Very excited about it. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.